The cold sweep of the ultrasound gel across my abdomen made me shiver, but not because of the temperature. I lay on the exam bed inside a small room at a women's clinic in Providence, my eyes fixed on the ceiling as I counted the tiny yellowed spots on the old acoustic panels, as if keeping track of them could hold my mind in place and stop it from slipping away. Dr. Lin guided the ultrasound probe gently across the curve of my belly, her movements slow and deliberate. I was nearly 30 weeks pregnant, and every appointment felt like walking a tightrope stretched between two cliffs, one side relief, the other side a quiet, persistent dread that never truly left me. I tried to keep my breathing even, but my palms were slick with sweat. She smiled, her eyes flicking to the monitor before turning back to me with a softened expression. "Everything looks good, Emily," she whispered. I nodded, feeling as if someone had just pulled me above the surface after I'd held my breath for far too long. But the relief wasn't real. The trembling in my chest hadn't stopped. Not because I feared something was wrong with the baby, but because I knew sooner or later he would find me. And I had no idea whether that would happen tomorrow, next month, or right here in this quiet little room. I had changed my name, moved to a city where no one knew me, cut off everyone from my past, and started again with a new identity, Emily Walker. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase the memories. And I couldn't erase the woman I used to be or the man I once loved. Nathaniel Blackwood was not a man easily left behind, especially not when his child was growing inside me, little by little, every day. I remembered the first time I met him in the emergency room in New York. I was the night shift nurse, and he walked in with a bullet wound in his shoulder, blood soaking through the white, expensive dress shirt he wore. He barely spoke, but his eyes— I have never forgotten those eyes. Cold as steel, yet holding something that kept me from turning away. It felt as if he saw straight through me the moment we met. And in some wild, reckless part of me, I believed I could touch whatever humanity remained in the monster he had become. When I discovered I was pregnant, I knew I had to leave him. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence and disappearance. Because I wasn't living only for myself anymore. I was living for the small life growing inside me. I couldn't let this child be dragged into the darkness I had glimpsed in the man I loved, and even after leaving him, I still felt his gaze at my back, as if the love between us, twisted, wounded, impossible, still lived in the air I breathed. Part of me prayed he would never find me, but another part, the part I hated admitting existed, waited for him. Waited for the moment he would appear. Waited for him to ask, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I wouldn't know how to answer, because what words could ever explain the terror of loving someone while running from them? "Your baby is healthy and growing right on track," Dr. Lin said, her voice soft as a breeze. I thanked her, but I didn't dare look at the screen. I was afraid that if I did, I would see something of him. A faint notch in the chin, a subtle arch in the brow. Anything that would make continuing my escape impossible. If you're still listening and this story touches something deep inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can keep bringing you heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every line you share with us. As I stepped out of the clinic, my hands still trembled a little even though the autumn air in Providence wasn't particularly cold. I pulled my gray wool scarf around my neck, my heartbeat still unsettled after hearing the rhythmic thrum of my baby's heartbeat on the screen. That sound, for any mother, is sacred. But for me, it was more than that. It was a reminder that every choice I made from now on was no longer only about me. I walked down the steps, resting one hand gently on my belly, trying not to let my thoughts wander too far. But as always, Memories slipped in without knocking, without asking permission. 6 months earlier, I had still been Emily Jensen, a night shift nurse in a large Manhattan hospital, a woman living a simple, steady life, until everything changed after the night Nathaniel Blackwood walked into the emergency room. The change didn't come all at once, but seeped in like a drug, slow, sweet, dangerous. I loved him. I know how foolish that sounds, especially when the man I loved was someone the entire city whispered about. The shadow behind massive business deals and people who vanished without a trace. But love doesn't reason. It arrives quickly, fiercely, and by the time I realized it, I had already stepped past the point of no return. Nathaniel showed me a world I had never known, dinners in places with no names on maps, whispered promises of a life without fear, eyes that felt like hypnosis, and the soft brush of his hand against my shoulder enough to make me forget reality. I trusted him, until one night. I woke at 2 a.m. to find him on the balcony, phone against his ear, speaking in a low, gravelly tone. I didn't hear the whole conversation, only a few words, but they were enough to shatter every piece of me. The delivery must arrive before dawn. If he turns, handle him like the one in Brooklyn. That sentence looped through my mind like a broken tape. And then came the truth, even more terrifying than that. I was carrying his child. I left that very day. I took nothing but a small bag, my medical files, and a sonogram printout I hadn't even had time to place in my journal. I cut every tie, asking an old friend in the legal field to help me change my name. From Emily Jensen, I became Emily Walker, a name quiet enough to attract no attention, familiar enough to avoid suspicion. I chose Providence because it was small, calm, and people said heartbreak sometimes softens in places where no one knows who you are. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. I took a part-time administrative job in a dental office where no one asked too many questions. In the evenings, I read to my baby even though it couldn't hear yet, cooked simple meals, and learned how to be a mother alone. Every day was a test of endurance. I taught myself not to stare at windows too long, not to jump when someone knocked, not to freeze at the accidental mention of the name Blackwood. I didn't know whether Nathaniel was looking for me. Part of me hoped he wasn't. Another part was certain that if he knew, he would never stop until he found me. He wasn't a man who let go easily, and that was exactly why I had to leave before he could make me stay. Because once he found me, every reason would crumble to dust. He had a way of making people believe they were the center of his universe, only to pull them into the orbit he created. But now, I was no longer a small satellite circling him. I was the mother of a child not yet born, and the only orbit I had to protect was the one leading my baby toward a life untouched by darkness. Or at least, that was the truth I clung to. The truth I prayed would be enough to keep us safe. I still remember the first night I met Nathaniel Blackwood so vividly that sometimes I wonder if I am reliving that moment every time I close my eyes. That shift began like any other graveyard shift in the emergency department of Manhattan Memorial, with the ambulance sirens slicing through the doors and the thick scent of disinfectant hanging in the air. I had just poured my 3rd cup of coffee when the red light flashed above Trauma Bay 6. Male patient, mid-30s, gunshot wound to the left shoulder, stable blood pressure but losing blood fast. I pulled on my gloves, walked quickly toward the gurney being wheeled in, and then stopped for a strange, suspended second. Even lying there, shirt soaked in blood, lips pressed tight against the pain, this man radiated something unlike any patient I had ever encountered. He didn't panic, didn't beg, didn't even groan. His eyes slid over me as if I wasn't the nurse preparing to cut open his blood-soaked shirt, but someone he somehow already knew. Those eyes were so cold I could feel a shiver trace down my spine, and yet I couldn't look away. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice into professionalism. "What's your name?" I asked. He answered curtly, "Nathaniel." No last name, no unnecessary detail. His voice was deep and low, each syllable sounding as if it had been considered carefully before leaving his mouth. I cut the fabric around the wound, cleaned the blood, checked the depth. The bullet had grazed the clavicle, mercifully sparing the major artery beneath. Even as an experienced nurse, my hands trembled slightly when my fingers brushed his skin, not from fear, but from a strange sense that I was standing before someone who didn't belong to this place, someone from another world entirely. The doctor arrived moments later. I stepped back to let them work, but my gaze kept drifting back toward Nathaniel. After anesthesia and extraction, he refused to stay overnight. No family contact, no identification, just a signature on a discharge form before he walked out with a bandaged shoulder and blood seeping through his jacket. But before leaving, he turned back to look at me. For a long time, no smile, no words. Just that look. And in that look, I didn't see a wounded man. I saw someone assessing, memorizing, choosing. A few days later, he came back to the hospital. Not for follow-up. Just to hand me a small paper bag containing coffee from the shop I always mentioned to my coworkers, and a folded slip of paper with his phone number on it. "In case you need someone to take you home after your shift," he said before walking away as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I didn't call, not for the first 3 days, but on the 4th night, when the sky opened and rain poured hard against the pavement, I stood under the hospital awning waiting for a taxi that never came. And I dialed his number, wanting to see if he truly meant it. In less than 10 minutes, a sleek black car pulled up, the window rolled down, and he said nothing except, "Get in, Emily." I got in. And the world I knew ceased to exist from that moment on. Everything began with a bullet wound and a glance. And from there, I stepped into the life of a man the entire city whispered about as a monster. Yet to me then, he was the only person who ever made me feel seen. After that night, Nathaniel slipped into my life like a ribbon of scented smoke winding through every quiet space, gentle, but impossible to sweep away. He never pushed, never pursued aggressively. He simply appeared, always at the right moment, in the right place, as if every step I took had been mapped long before I took it. On nights after my shift, he often waited under the street lamp across from the hospital, never stepping inside, always giving me just enough distance to choose. But each time I spotted the glow of his headlights through rain or snow, my heart faltered. Our first date wasn't at some glittering restaurant, it was in a tiny Italian eatery tucked between 2 brick buildings in West Village. The elderly owner, white-bearded and warm, greeted Nathaniel by name in a familiar, lilting Italian accent. We sat at the last table near the fireplace, candlelight trembling against our wine glasses and reflecting in his dark, fathomless eyes. I remember laughing more than usual, and I remember that when he reached across the table to take my hand, I didn't pull away. Everything after that moved like a rush of wind. He took me to places I had only seen in magazines. One evening, on a private yacht docked at the Hudson Pier, wrapped in spring fog, we ate dinner under dim lights with jazz drifting from an old speaker. On another night, he reserved a table at a restaurant on the 60th floor of a glass tower, where Manhattan glowed beneath us like an ocean of stars. I still remember the shock of stepping into his penthouse for the first time, everything immaculate, coldly pristine, except for one corner with an old wooden piano. He said it belonged to his mother, the one thing he couldn't bring himself to touch. In moments like those, I felt as if I were loving a real man, not the myth people whispered about. To me, Nathaniel wasn't a ruthless kingpin. He was the man who drove me home at 2 a.m. in silence, who sometimes cooked breakfast and placed it gently by my bedside, who touched my cheek as though afraid I might vanish. He always knew when I needed quiet and when I needed to be held. Every time I tried to keep my distance, reminding myself that something about him was wrong, he appeared again with a look, a word, or simply his quiet presence, dissolving my fear. Once he took me to an old theater, empty except for the two of us. The orchestra consisted of a single piano, a violin, and a woman singing old French love songs. When the stage lights dimmed, he turned to me and asked if I could imagine a life like that. I nodded. And that night, I knew I loved him in a way I could never undo. Not because of what he gave me, but because of the way he made me believe I mattered. By the time I realized I was living inside a velvet cage, it was already too late. The walls had no chains, but I could no longer walk out. Or maybe I no longer wanted to. And that, more than anything, was what terrified me most. That night, it rained. Not the heavy, furious kind of rain Manhattan was known for, but a thin, mist-like drizzle, persistent and haunting, seeping into fabric, slipping through door frames, clinging to the skin like breath. I woke around 3 in the morning to a sound so faint it shouldn't have woken me at all. A sliver of warm, golden light bled through the crack of the bedroom door, stretching across the wooden floor. Nathaniel was not beside me. I rose, my bare feet cold against the floorboards, a quiet unease tightening inside me. As I neared his office, I was about to call his name, then froze. The door was only partially closed. From inside came his voice, low, sharp, and icy in a way I almost didn't recognize. It was the same voice that whispered love to me every night, now stripped of warmth, sharpened into something lethal. He was on the phone. I don't care who's backing him. If he kicks at my spine one more time, I want his head on the table before the week ends. Silence, then a dry, humorless laugh. No lawyers, just the right people. Bring him to Warehouse 9, Friday night. No loose ends. I stood motionless. Those words cut into me like shards of glass. I didn't dare breathe. For a moment, the entire world seemed to solidify around me, frozen and hollow, while his voice spilled through the door like an echo from some deep, merciless cavern. I had heard rumors about Nathaniel, about his past, his dealings in the shadows, the faceless partners, the handshake agreements that lived outside the law. But I had never truly believed them. Or perhaps, I had never wanted to believe them. I had built in my mind the image of a complicated man trying to change, a wounded soul attempting to rise out of the darkness that had once shaped him. But now the truth lay bare, without disguise, without mercy. He was not just connected to that world, he was its center. I stepped back, gripping the wall as if I needed it to keep from collapsing. I returned to the bedroom, my heartbeat ricocheting inside my chest. I lay down and pretended to sleep when he came in minutes later, rain still clinging to his hair, the faint scent of smoke drifting with him. He slipped under the blanket beside me as though he had never uttered a single one of those words, as though he were still the man who brought me to an old theater and asked if I could imagine a different life. I stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into my hair. And in that moment, I knew I had to leave him. Not because my love for him had dimmed, but because the man I loved was only a version of him that did not exist. And if I stayed, that love would not only destroy me, it would endanger the small life growing inside me every day. I stepped out of the ultrasound room with the medical file clutched tightly in my trembling hands, my heart still tangled in the images I'd just seen on the screen. The baby was growing stronger every day, healthy, promising a living piece of a love I no longer dared to speak aloud. I walked down the hallway with hurried steps, needing to leave before the fear inside me could take shape and swallow me whole. And then I stopped. Completely, as if time itself hardened into glass around me. Just a few yards ahead, Nathaniel stood leaning casually against the reception counter, one hand tucked into the pocket of his black overcoat, his face carved with the same cold, sharp beauty I once traced with my fingertips. His gaze swept across the waiting room and stopped when it found me. Every sound dissolved. I no longer heard the chatter of patients or the shuffle of nurses, only the violent thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. I couldn't breathe. My feet rooted themselves to the ground. My belly tightened. 7 months of hiding, of watching every shadow, every unknown number, every slight coincidence only for this. For him to appear here, in the one place I had clung to as my last refuge. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even surprised. It was still, terrifyingly still, as if he had known. As if he had always known, waiting only for the exact moment to step out of the shadows. I wanted to turn and run, but my body refused to move. A nurse passed between us, snapping the tension but not breaking it. I quickly moved toward the emergency exit, desperate for this to be a trick of an exhausted mind. But his voice rose behind me, steady, deep, unmistakably close. "Running again, Emily?" I stopped. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might burst. He walked toward me, slow steps, deliberate, each one cutting the distance between us with certainty. No one in the room seemed to notice, or maybe they chose not to. Nathaniel had a way of dimming the world around him until only he remained in focus. He halted in front of me, his gaze dropping to my belly beneath the loose coat. His eyes froze for a single heartbeat, then shifted first surprise, then comprehension. It wasn't the look of a man learning he would be a father. It was the look of someone who had suspected the truth for a long time and was now simply confirming it. "You're pregnant." His words weren't truly a question. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat tightened, not with emotion, but with fear. The fear of being dragged back into the world I escaped. The fear that he could reclaim everything with a single decision, a single touch. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came slowly but struck with the force of a blade. I clenched the file in my shaking hands. "Because I didn't know what you would do, and I won't let my child grow up in fear." He said nothing for a long moment, his eyes locked on mine. My words didn't anger him. They deepened something inside him, pulling his thoughts inward. Then he nodded slightly, as if weighing a choice only he could understand. "Where did you go after the last time we saw each other?" I stepped back, meeting his gaze head-on. "It doesn't matter anymore, Nathaniel. What matters is that you know now. And I know too. We are not the people we were." He studied me for a few seconds, then said softly, "We need to talk, but not here." I didn't respond. I stepped back again and turned away, my pulse still wild and frantic. I knew that moment had been waiting for me from the very beginning. And I knew there would be no more running after this. I almost ran toward the reception desk, my palms slick with sweat, my heartbeat thundering so loudly that each step sounded like a drum pounding inside my ears. Every instinct in me screamed to get out of that building as fast as possible, to put as much distance as I could between myself and Nathaniel. But as I approached the counter, the receptionist, a young blonde woman whose familiar smile had greeted me at every appointment, looked up at me. Then her eyes shifted to the man approaching behind me. The small lobby suddenly felt suffocating. I could feel heat rising across my back, the unmistakable pressure of his presence filling the room. Nathaniel stood behind me in silence, yet the weight he carried thickened the air. The receptionist gave a wavering smile, her voice trembling slightly. "Hello? Can I help you?" I meant to speak, to stop him, but it was already too late. He pulled out his wallet and placed a simple black business card on the counter. No logo. Just a name and a phone number pressed into the surface in muted silver ink. "I'm looking for someone, a woman named Emily Walker." She had an appointment here this morning. The receptionist looked at me, then back at him, clearly torn. I could see her lips parting to refuse when Nathaniel leaned forward, not toward her, but toward me, and his eyes never left mine. He didn't need her to confirm anything. I was standing right there, and he already knew the truth. When she remained silent, he finally turned to me, his voice dropping low. "You changed your name." I bit my lip, gripping the medical file so tightly it nearly bent under my fingers. He looked me over, slowly, carefully, his gaze stopping where my coat could no longer hide the curve of my belly. A clear, unmistakable swell beneath the fabric. His expression barely shifted, but something in his eyes did. Something deep and quiet, like an undercurrent breaking the surface. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition, hurt, and a question he didn't have to speak aloud. I breathed deeply, trying to hold my voice steady, though I heard it crack when I finally whispered, "I wasn't going to tell you." He stepped closer, just half an arm's length between us. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Why?" I swallowed hard, my heart battering against my ribs. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked, this time more clearly, yet still holding himself back. I looked into the eyes that once made me trust everything and now forced me to fight to stand my ground. "Afraid that if you knew, you wouldn't let me go. Afraid my child would grow up in a world where everything is decided by violence and power. Afraid I would believe you again." Nathaniel went still. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed at a loss for words. The sentences that always flowed from him like polished weapons now caught somewhere deeper, unable to surface. He stepped back half a pace, slid his hands into his coat pockets, his gaze dropping to the floor. "How long?" "Almost 7 months. And you planned to never let me know." I didn't answer. The silence between us thickened like fog, dense, cold, wrapping itself around two people who had once been everything to each other. The receptionist watched us with worry, and in that moment I suddenly realized how exposed my private life was, laid bare for strangers to witness. I turned away, but before I could step forward, Nathaniel said quietly, "I didn't come to take you back. I came to know that you're safe, and if that child is mine, then I have a right to protect it." I stood still, not looking at him, but my entire chest tightened. He was no longer the man I left behind, but he wasn't yet someone I could trust again either. And I knew that this confrontation was only the beginning of something far larger than either of us could see. I didn't turn toward him, but I held the file against my chest as I stepped out of the clinic, my thoughts swirling chaotically. Nathaniel walked slowly behind me, maintaining a careful distance, not close enough to corner me, but close enough that I could feel him there, solid and undeniable. His voice came quietly, deliberately, as if meant only for me. "We need to talk. Alone." I turned to him, still guarded. He hadn't changed much since the last time I saw him, the same deep, set eyes, the same controlled expression, but there was something different too, something I couldn't quite name. I nodded slowly. "Not here. There's a cafe a few blocks away. It's where I usually go after appointments. It's quiet, and I feel safe there." We said nothing as we walked. The tension between us felt like a taut string stretched to breaking. My heart trembled, yet I kept moving. When we finally sat at a small table tucked into the corner, I looked at him for a long time before I spoke. "If we're going to talk, then it needs to be clear from the start. I'm not coming back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not trying to rebuild anything we used to be." He nodded, listening in silence. "You came because you needed answers and now you have them. But if you want to be present in any part of this child's life, you'll have to accept my conditions. I won't let my child be pulled into your world. No weapons, no men watching, no violence. No late-night phone calls that make me jump in fear. If you truly want to be a father, you'll have to change. Not for me. For the child. His eyes softened, shifting from cold steel to something solemn, almost wounded. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just sat there, silent, weighing every word. Then he nodded. He didn't promise change overnight, but he wanted a beginning, a chance to prove himself. I looked at him, unsure whether I could believe him yet, but fully aware that no matter where I ran, the truth would follow. And his presence, whether I welcomed it or not, was part of the blood inside the life growing within me. Just once, I whispered, if you cross any of those lines, I'll disappear. And this time, you'll never find me. He said only one sentence. Then don't give me a reason to fail. After that meeting at the cafe, I expected not to see Nathaniel for a long time, or that any future interaction would happen strictly on my terms. But only 3 days later, I saw his familiar car parked less than half a block from the apartment I was renting. At first, a cold shiver ran through me. I thought he was watching me again, imposing himself into my life without permission. But when I climbed the stairs, I saw a tall man in a black suit standing outside my door, his eyes scanning the hallway. He nodded politely and introduced himself as Mason, assigned to ensure my safety and the safety of the baby. I nearly shoved him away on instinct, but before I could react, my phone rang. Nathaniel. His voice was calm, unforced. He said he knew I didn't want surveillance or control, but during his search he had found a few questionable names asking about me. He didn't specify who or how he knew, but he didn't have to. His world, whether I liked it or not, was still lingering outside my door. And because of the baby, I couldn't afford to be reckless. I reluctantly allowed Mason to stay only at night, and only in the hallway. Nathaniel didn't appear right away. He let things settle quietly. A few days later, I found a pregnancy pillow outside my door, the expensive kind I had never let myself consider. The next day, a bottle warmer. Then stretch mark oil. Then a prenatal yoga mat. No notes. No messages. But I knew exactly who they came from. By the weekend, I signaled Mason to allow Nathaniel to come up, but only to talk. He arrived on a light, drizzly Sunday afternoon, without a car, without guards, holding only a small paper bag with croissants from the French bakery I used to love in Manhattan. He didn't step inside. He stood in the hallway while we talked. We didn't revisit the past. Instead, we talked about how I was sleeping, how often the baby kicked, whether I could still lie on my back without losing breath, and whether the doctor had said anything new. His voice was calm, unhurried, without pretense. Just a man trying to learn how to walk beside a world he had wounded. These quiet meetings began to happen regularly. Some days he simply walked with me through the small neighborhood park. Some days he accompanied me to a prenatal checkup and left before I could thank him. I didn't want to admit it, but a small part of me felt safer knowing he was near a small part, but undeniable. Everything unfolded quickly, but without the noise of our past. Something in Nathaniel had changed, or maybe it was just the way he showed himself. He maintained distance, never stepping inside my home unless I allowed it. But his persistence slowly lowered my guard. I still wasn't ready to forgive him, much less trust him again. But I began to believe that he genuinely wanted to be a father. Not as a powerful man imposing his will, but in the most human way he knew how. And sometimes, that alone was enough to make me take one small step back toward him, even as my heart trembled at the memory of everything we had survived. When the 8th month began, I realized Nathaniel's presence no longer tightened my shoulders the way it once had. He was no longer the silent shadow watching from a distance, no longer the man who kept me awake at night with fear clawing at my ribs. He became the person who knocked on my door every Saturday morning with a nutrient-packed smoothie for expectant mothers, the one who waited quietly in the hallway after every prenatal checkup, the one who sent short messages asking if I had eaten, how I was sleeping, whether the baby had kicked more than usual. I didn't answer all of them, but I read every single one. Some afternoons, I allowed myself to walk beside him in the small park near my building, where no one knew who we were, where no one looked at him with guarded suspicion, where no one whispered the name I had spent months trying to forget. We talked like two people who had once loved each other and were now learning how to be something gentler, something like friends. Sometimes he told me about his childhood with his mother, a pianist who died far too young. Sometimes I told him about the fears of becoming a single mother, the nightmares that visited me since the day I learned I was pregnant. Whenever I opened up, he listened, he didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything or soften anything. He simply stayed. And slowly, painfully, I realized a part of me still loved him. Loved him in a quiet, guarded way I was afraid to examine too closely. But it was there. Yet the more peaceful our moments became, the sharper my inner conflict grew. I couldn't forget who he was. I couldn't forget what I heard through that half-closed office door. Couldn't forget the women I'd seen slip through the hospital hallway with bruises half hidden under their sleeves, fear sealed behind silence. I didn't know what Nathaniel had done in detail, but I knew enough to understand his world was not the one I wanted for my child. I couldn't let my baby grow into a life where words weighed more than laws, where silence was bought with fear, and where expensive gifts were used to bury the truth. I began to feel trapped inside an emotional snare, where memories of our past love glimmered like shards of glass in sunlight, beautiful enough to make me forget they could cut me at any moment. Nathaniel seemed to sense the shift. One afternoon, he asked a question that seemed harmless, yet left me speechless for a long time. If you'd never heard that phone call, would you have stayed? I didn't answer right away, because I honestly didn't know. Maybe I would have stayed, sinking deeper until escape was impossible. Maybe I would have kept loving him, convincing myself everything was fine until the truth cornered me. And that was what scared me most. I wasn't afraid of Nathaniel hurting me. I was afraid I would hurt myself by loving him still. We sat together for a long time after that, saying nothing. We didn't need words, because we both understood that whatever existed between us hadn't vanished. It was only buried under layers of doubt, pain, and truths, too heavy to ignore. And I began to realize that if we were ever going to move forward, we would have to face not just each other, but the darkness within ourselves. Monica appeared on an early winter afternoon when the sky hung low and gray, and cold air seeped through the window frames no matter how tightly I shut them. Nathaniel arrived later than usual that day, but he didn't come alone. The woman beside him looked to be in her early 30s, tall, short brown hair, dressed simply but moving with a crisp precision, her eyes tracking every small movement I made. Nathaniel introduced her as Monica, the one who would temporarily replace Mason as my security detail. I could feel the professionalism in every one of her gestures, but it was also clear she wasn't only a bodyguard. Monica didn't resemble the men who once followed Nathaniel. She wasn't silent. She didn't loom. But she observed with an acuity that made me feel exposed, as if she could see straight through me. She began showing up every day, exactly at 8 in the morning, sitting in the cafe downstairs or pacing the opposite sidewalk. Never intruding, but always close enough to intervene. At first, I found it suffocating. But slowly, as unfamiliar faces began lingering too long near my building, as someone tried my door late one night but fled when I called out, I understood Monica's presence wasn't excessive, it was necessary. One evening, while Nathaniel walked with me, I finally asked him directly what was happening. He stayed silent for a long time before speaking. Damien crosses out of prison. Those words made my heart stutter. I had never met Damien, but his name wasn't unfamiliar. When I lived with Nathaniel, I'd heard that name whispered during abruptly ended phone calls, seen it on photographs tucked into files he never left open. Damien had been a former partner, or more accurately, a former enemy. A man who once sat on the council of an organization Nathaniel was now trying to disentangle himself from. They had worked together, until they turned on each other after a failed operation no one ever spoke about. Nathaniel never explained, but his eyes whenever that name surfaced told me enough. Damien wasn't just a threat to him, he was a threat to anyone who had ever been close to him. Including me. Including the child inside me, Monica later clarified. Damien had once sworn to cut out anything that made Nathaniel weak. And now, he knew about me. She didn't explain how, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was that the moment I re-entered Nathaniel's orbit, I became the most obvious weakness he had. Monica started training me in basic survival. How to recognize when someone was tailing me, what to do if I was forced into a car, my new door codes, emergency numbers. Each session was a reminder that I was no longer living in an ordinary world. I had tried to outrun Nathaniel, tried to build a new life, believed that distance and a new name and a quiet city would be enough, but when that world finally caught up to me, it didn't knock, it broke down every barrier I had constructed. Nathaniel began staying longer each time he visited, saying nothing about Damien but carrying tension in every glance, every movement. I knew he was planning something, maybe retreat, maybe retaliation. But the thing that frightened me most wasn't his plan, it was that he'd stopped shielding me from it. Somehow I was stepping once again into a world I had risked everything to escape. And this time, I wasn't alone. A small life was growing inside me day by day, and I no longer knew if I had the strength to protect my child from everything that was coming. I began to see everything around me with different eyes. Every unfamiliar sound in the hallway, every person passing the cafe window, every car lingering too long in front of the building made my senses tighten. Monica assured me things were still under control, but I could no longer quiet the feeling that everything was slowly slipping past the boundaries we'd tried to set. I didn't tell Nathaniel, because I knew he would tighten the security again, add more people, build the very cage I had once fought so desperately to escape. But inside me, the fear had already rooted itself. I startled whenever someone knocked at night, even when it was only a delivery driver at the wrong door. I began imagining situations where I wouldn't react fast enough, moments when I would be alone, the small windows of vulnerability when I might forget to lock the door twice. My mind filled with all the terrible things that could happen to my child. And the more I thought, the more I realized I was losing control of everything I had fought to build. Damien could appear at any time, in any form, and with just one small opening, I could lose everything. I would watch Nathaniel speak on the phone in that deep, measured, dangerous voice of his eyes sharp as steel, and I wondered whether he truly believed he could protect us, or if he was simply trying to hold the world together long enough to keep it from collapsing. Because if even Nathaniel couldn't promise safety, then who could I trust? And somewhere in the quietest part of my heart, I began to question whether staying anywhere near him was still the safest choice for my child. That afternoon, the sky dimmed and light snow fell like powdered chalk, dusting the windshield with a thin, milky layer. Monica was driving me home from my routine appointment, everything seemingly normal until I noticed how often she checked the rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the intervals between her glances grew shorter. Her alert eyes and the heavy silence filling the car made the back of my neck prickle. When I asked what was wrong, she didn't answer at once, only told me to tighten my seatbelt. In that moment, my heartbeat seemed to falter. Monica said a car had been following us since we left the clinic's parking lot. Not close enough to alarm anyone, but not distant enough to disappear either. She didn't know who was driving it, but her instincts honed by years in the field told her it wasn't coincidence. I turned and looked back. A gray car, dark-tinted windows, no front plate. On any normal day, maybe I would have brushed it off. But now, with Damien Cross's name hanging over us like a suspended blade, every sign felt like an alarm. Monica didn't take long to confirm her suspicion. She turned sharply down a narrow side street, weaving through unfamiliar back roads, taking so many sudden turns I lost track of where we were. After nearly 10 minutes of switching directions, she finally pulled into a cluster of old brick row houses tucked deep inside a quiet, forgotten neighborhood. She turned toward me, her expression steady but severe. This was the safe house, one of the emergency apartments prepared for situations exactly like this. My legs trembled as I stepped inside, even though Monica insisted no one had managed to follow us. The apartment was small and bare, furnished with only the essentials, spotless but without a trace of personal life. It felt like a stage set for someone who needed to vanish. I sat on the stiff sofa, placed my hands on my belly, and felt the baby move gently beneath my fingers. The sensation brought tears to my eyes, not from fear, but from exhaustion. I had run. I had changed my name. I had tried to build a normal life, yet the shadow of Nathaniel and everything attached to him still found me. Monica moved through the apartment checking locks, windows, the alarm system. She said little, only left a small handgun in the drawer and warned me not to open the door for anyone but her or Nathaniel. When I asked if he knew where I was, she nodded. He wouldn't come right away, doing so would draw too much attention, but he had already activated the highest level of protection. I looked around the room, feeling like a creature tucked away in some dark forest, hidden but hunted, uncertain of what waited outside. Part of me felt relief knowing my child was safer for the moment. But another part ached with the realization that I no longer had choices, only the instinct to keep running. And this time, I wasn't running for myself. I was running for a life that didn't yet understand the world, yet had already been thrust into it with fear and trembling steps. Near midnight, I heard the knock, 3 light taps, a pause, then 2 more, Monica's exact signal. My heart tightened painfully. I moved to the door quietly and looked through the peephole. Nathaniel stood there, alone. No guards. No luxury car waiting outside. His gray coat was wet from the misting rain, his hair disheveled, and though his eyes looked tired, they still held the sharp focus that never seemed to leave him. I opened the door. He stepped inside, closing it behind him, filling the small apartment with an air so tense it felt like he had carried the storm in with him. I didn't greet him or offer a seat. We simply stood there facing each other for a few long seconds that stretched like slow-motion film. He broke the silence. He said the place was no longer safe, that despite the evasive routes, there were signs Damien had tracked the trail. He hadn't appeared himself, but the shadows he sent were drawing closer. Nathaniel said Monica had found a listening device near the clinic I frequented, and though they couldn't be sure it was meant for me, he wasn't willing to gamble on maybes. Then he told me he wanted to take me to Boston to one of his private houses on the outskirts, guarded by an independent security system, far from the city center, with no direct ties to his former organization. I shook my head immediately. No, I didn't want to return to that city, to that life, to the place where I had once believed I was safe, only to flee in the dark with a shattered heart and a child still forming inside me. Nathaniel didn't argue. He didn't beg, didn't command. He simply looked at me with the stillness of a winter lake. Then he said one sentence that silenced everything. "If you stay here and something happens, I will never forgive myself." I turned away, biting my lip hard enough to taste blood. I didn't want to give him control again. I didn't want to return to a place soaked in memories both beautiful and devastating, but I couldn't deny what pulsed beneath my resistance fear. Every night I slept with a hand over my belly, as if that touch alone could shield my child from whatever hunted us. I asked him if he was certain the house was safe. He nodded. It had been his mother's home when she was young, now completely renovated. No one from his old life knew about it. No documents, no digital trail. Only the few he trusted most were aware it existed, and Monica would accompany us. I looked at him a long time before exhaling, as though surrendering not to him, but to a truth I could no longer escape. With him, at least my child might live. I nodded, slowly, reluctantly, but honestly. Nathaniel didn't say another word. He stepped closer, lifted a hand as if to touch my shoulder, but stopped halfway. His eyes spoke more than anything he could have said, not victory, but gratitude. The next morning, when the car pulled away from the narrow alley where the safe house hid among gray buildings, I watched through the rearview mirror as the last remnants of my old life disappeared into the fog. I knew that once I returned to Boston, nothing would be the same. And this time, every choice I made would not be for myself, but for the small, fragile life growing stronger inside me every day. The drive took nearly 2 hours through winding back roads to ensure we weren't followed from the temporary safe house to the western outskirts of Boston. It unfolded in near total silence. Monica sat in the front seat, her eyes fixed on the ribbon of road ahead, while I sat in the back, one hand resting lightly on my belly and the other pressed against the cold window as the landscape drifted past like a film I wasn't truly watching. Nathaniel sat beside me, close enough that I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, yet still holding himself at a distance, as if afraid that any small gesture of familiarity might cause me to withdraw entirely. I couldn't identify the exact feeling churning inside me. It was heavy and conflicted, two opposing currents twisting around each other. I felt grateful that he had arranged a place of safety. Grateful that what he was doing now was no longer just a collection of vague promises but tangible action. And yet, somewhere beneath that gratitude, an old ember of anger still smoldered, the kind that had been burning ever since the night I discovered the truth about the man he really was. I had once dreamed of a family with him, once imagined mornings where the three of us ate breakfast in a sunlit kitchen, the sound of a child's laughter echoing through a home washed in warm light. But now, even as we shared a car heading toward what might pass for a safer future, I understood with painful clarity that the memories we once carried no longer fit together like before. Nathaniel didn't speak for most of the drive. Only once, when the car stopped for gas, he turned to ask if I was hungry, if I wanted anything. I shook my head. It was a simple gesture, yet one loaded with everything I could not voice. I wasn't hungry, but I wasn't at ease either. I didn't want food, but I didn't want a silent war. I simply wasn't ready. When the car finally turned onto the stone-paved road leading to the house, I saw a 2-story home with gray-white siding, a broad porch, and a line of bare trees that told me it had weathered many harsh winters. Nothing extravagant, no guards visible, no ostentatious security systems, just a quietness so profound it almost felt disorienting. Monica carried the luggage inside first, leaving me and Nathaniel standing beneath the glow spilling through the glass panes of the front door. He opened it but didn't step in. Instead, he turned to me and said in a low, rough voice that if I needed space, he would stay in the guest room at the back of the house, completely separate. He would not interfere unless I called for him. I didn't speak. I only nodded. Not because forgiveness had arrived, but because I was learning how to survive beside the man I had once loved, and, perhaps in some buried part of me, still did. We walked inside together, two strangers carrying a shared history and a child nearing arrival in this world. I knew the coming days wouldn't be easy. But for tonight, at least I would sleep in a room with a solid lock and feel my baby breathing in a space that was, however briefly, still. One evening, while I sat in the living room quietly folding the tiny newborn clothes Monica had helped me buy, Nathaniel came in, his eyes shadowed, his face drawn tight with the weight of a phone call that had lasted too long. He sat across from me, silent for a moment, then told me plainly that Damien was preparing something. Not an impulsive strike, but a deliberate sequence of moves, subtle, calculated, aimed directly at the weakest point in Nathaniel's defenses. Me. He said there were signs Damien had begun reclaiming old territories, recruiting former neutral players, even contacting a few faces from Nathaniel's organization, tempting them to turn. Men he had believed severed from that world. When I asked what he intended to do, Nathaniel looked at me for a long time before telling me he was in the process of making every part of his empire legitimate. The restaurants, the real estate, the transport company, everything was being transferred into clean, transparent corporations under the oversight of an independent legal team. He had begun, months ago, right after learning I was pregnant, but it wasn't something that could be done overnight. Some chains were too tangled to unwind quickly, and there were people who had no intention of letting him walk away. I listened, half believing, half doubting, but unable to deny that something in him truly had shifted. Perhaps, for the first time, he was thinking about a future not stained with blood and vengeance, but that also placed a target on his back. Damien would never stay silent while Nathaniel attempted to leave the world they once built together. I rested a hand on my belly, felt the baby turn gently in sleep, and wondered where this looming war between two men would leave me and the child, who hadn't yet opened his eyes. Because sometimes, what begins in love ends in a fight for survival. That morning brought one of the rare shafts of sunlight after days of gray, damp cold. I stepped into the backyard to breathe the crisp air, Monica positioned a short distance away. Her earpiece tucked discreetly against her hair, her gaze sweeping the perimeter with habitual precision. I was watering the young lavender plants we had just set into the soil, when a small rustling sound came from the left side of the fence, so faint I almost overlooked it, but loud enough for Monica to snap toward it instantly. Everything that happened next unfolded with the speed of a scene ripped from a frantic, distorted reel. Two men in dark clothing burst from nowhere. One grabbed my arm, yanking me so hard I stumbled forward, instinctively cradling my belly. Monica shouted, firing a warning shot into the air, the crack of the bullet slamming through my skull like a shockwave, but the man dragging me refused to release his grip. He pressed a foul cloth that smelled like gasoline over my mouth, hauling me backward as I struggled helplessly, every muffled cry trapped in terror and pain. My mind filled with blood and panic as I thought of the baby, this fragile body inside mine that hadn't even taken its first breath. Monica charged forward, firing again. The shot hit the man's leg, sending him screaming as he finally let me go. I collapsed onto the damp grass, gasping, but before I could gather myself, another arm snaked around my torso, dragging me away again. I heard the roar of an engine in front of the house, doors slamming, shouting a chaos of feet and curses, and then Nathaniel's voice cut through everything like thunder. "Don't touch her." A gunshot exploded, close and terrifying, Monica shouting my name as she ran. My vision blurred as I was shoved toward a waiting car near the gate, but just as the door flew open, a figure lunged in, yanking me backward with brutal force. Nathaniel. He wrapped his arms around me as though letting go would mean losing me forever. Another attacker rushed forward, but before he could lay a hand on me, another gunshot rang out. Monica dropped him without hesitation. Nathaniel pulled me into the house, slamming every door shut, locking them hard from the inside. I couldn't form words. My heart hammered so violently I felt pain tearing across my ribs. Nathaniel cupped my face, his hands cold but firm, as if confirming I was truly alive. He asked if I was hurt, if I felt pain anywhere, if the baby had moved. I could only nod as tears streamed down my cheeks. Damien hadn't appeared. He didn't need to. A handful of lackeys was enough to poison the air with fear and to remind us how close he was. Nathaniel struck the wall with his fist once he confirmed I was safe, anger and helplessness shaking through him like fire. Monica was already shouting orders into her radio, activating every emergency protocol. No one said it aloud, but we all knew. Time was running out. The fragile safety I had once believed in was already crumbling, fragile as thin glass in a storm. In Nathaniel's arms, for the first time in weeks, I felt not only fear but a rising fury, not at him, but at everything threatening the small, unformed life I had carried for so many months. In that moment, I made a silent vow. I would not let anyone, not Damien Cross, not the ghosts of Nathaniel's past, not the darkness stalking us, lay a hand on my child ever again. 3 days after the attack, I woke close to midnight to an unfamiliar sound coming from the study at the end of the hallway. A thin blade of light spilled beneath the door, telling me Nathaniel was still awake. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb Monica, who was asleep on the long couch in the living room. Whatever drowsiness remained dissolved the moment I heard Nathaniel's voice through the half-closed door, low, cold as carved stone, the tone he used only when giving orders. He didn't know I was standing there, silently hearing every word spoken through the satellite phone. Someone on the other end reported that Damien had been tracked. He was hiding in an old warehouse near the city limits, and with a single nod from Nathaniel, the plan to eliminate him could be carried out before dawn. There was no mistaking the steel in his voice when he said to clean every trace. No need to bring him in. Don't give him the chance to try again. In that moment, I felt myself pulled backward into a truth I had always tried to push away, that no matter how much Nathaniel had changed, at his core, he was still a man who could order another man's death as if it were simply another line item in his work. I pushed the door open just as he ended the call. He startled, phone still in hand, eyes wide as if he hadn't imagined he would find me standing there. I didn't yell or cry. I simply asked what he was doing. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He pocketed the phone and stepped toward me, his eyes dimming with a guilt almost childlike. I asked again, this time my voice cracking, was he planning to kill Damien? His response was a sentence I would never forget. He had no other choice. When I looked into his eyes, I saw 1,000 silent battles raging inside him. His fear for me, his fear for our child, his hatred for what Damien had done, and above all, the desperate need to end everything before it took away whatever was left of his life. But I also saw this. If he carried out that order, he would never escape the darkness he was trying so hard to leave behind. I stepped closer and placed my hand against his chest, feeling the forceful, restless beating beneath his shirt. I told him that if he truly wanted to start over, if he wanted to become the kind of father our child could one day speak of with pride, then he had to stop now, not because Damien deserved mercy, but because our child deserved a beginning unstained by blood. Nathaniel said nothing for a long time. Then he turned away, bracing both hands on the desk as if every part of him was struggling against a rising tide. I didn't know what he would choose, but that night was the first time I ever saw him step back from the very path his entire life had been built upon. He didn't call back. He sent no further orders. He only stood there in the long shadow cast by the desk lamp, and I knew that if he could withstand that moment, perhaps, just perhaps, we might have a chance to start again. The next morning, he left early without saying where he was going. He only left a slip of paper on the kitchen counter. A few handwritten words. I need to finish this the right way. Don't worry, I won't let you down. I read it again and again, my heart swelling with fear and hope intertwined. Nathaniel had never hesitated when making decisions, especially with someone like Damien Cross. Yet now, after everything Damien had done, he was choosing another path. It wasn't weakness, it was courage. Monica stayed glued to me all day, her eyes flicking often to the screen showing the GPS tracker on Nathaniel's car. She didn't say much, but the tension in her face told me that whatever was happening wasn't simple. Near noon, she received a call. She stepped outside to take it, returned with a pale face but a relieved nod. "It's over," she whispered. "He's safe." But when Monica later recounted what happened at the abandoned lumber mill on the edge of the city, I finally understood the terrifying capability of the man I loved. Nathaniel had gone alone, unarmed, no vest. He walked into the center of the warehouse where Damien and his two most loyal men stood waiting, guns drawn and aimed straight at his heart. Damien laughed, pressing the cold muzzle of his pistol against Nathaniel's forehead, his finger twitching on the trigger. "You've gone soft, Nathaniel," Damien spat. "You gave up the crown for a woman and a brat. Today I end you, and then I find them." In that moment, hanging between life and death, Nathaniel didn't blink. He simply stared into Damien's eyes with a calmness that was more terrifying than rage. "Check your phone, Damien," he said, his voice low and steady. Damien frowned but didn't lower the gun. Then his phone on the table buzzed. He put it on speaker. It was his chief accountant screaming in panic. "Boss, it's all gone. The offshore accounts, the assets, everything is frozen. The financial intelligence unit just flagged us. And the police. They are raiding warehouses 4 and 9. Someone sent your entire ledger to the FBI." The phone slipped from Damien's hand, shattering on the concrete. Nathaniel stepped forward, pressing his chest against the gun barrel, forcing Damien back. "While you were busy stalking my wife, I bought your loyalty. I didn't come here to kill you, Damien. Death is too easy. I came to make you destitute, hunted, and homeless." Nathaniel leaned in, whispering the final verdict. "Sirens will be here in 3 minutes. You can pull that trigger and die with me, or run now and live like a rat for the rest of your life. Choose." Damien lowered the gun, his arrogance crumbling into pure terror. He looked at Nathaniel, then at the door, and finally turned and ran, disappearing into the woods like a beaten dog. When Nathaniel returned late that afternoon, he walked into the kitchen with dust on his coat. He didn't say a word, just took a single unspent bullet from his pocket, the one Damien had chambered, and dropped it into the trash. "He won't come back," he said quietly. I rushed to him, burying my face in his chest, sobbing. He hadn't chosen violence. He had chosen intelligence to dismantle the monster, protecting us without staining his hands with blood again. That evening, when everything seemed to have settled and the wind outside the porch had softened into a faint winter murmur, I sat across from Nathaniel in the living room, warming my hands around a ceramic mug. He sat quietly, the hardness in his eyes softened after days of strain, but I knew there was one more truth that needed to be spoken. I told him that I saw the change in him, that I felt his effort, and I knew none of it came easily. But I could not live suspended between trust and fear. I could not bring our child into a world where uncertainty hovered over every breath. I told him I needed a commitment not in words, but in one final act. I gave him 2 weeks. 2 weeks to finish everything, sever the past completely, legalize whatever remained entangled, and prove that he had stepped fully out of the shadows. If, after 2 weeks, nothing was clear, I would leave not as punishment, but to protect our child. No anger, no blame, just the choice a mother makes for the life she is about to bring into the world. Nathaniel didn't protest. He only nodded, his eyes sadder than I had ever seen them. But in that sadness there was no despair. There was resolve. In that single nod, I saw a man standing at the final threshold between who he had been and who he hoped to become. And I knew that if he truly meant to keep us, those 2 weeks would mean everything. That night, a gentle rain began to fall, each drop tapping softly against the porch roof like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. I could not sleep. My body felt heavy, and the contractions started as a faint tightening low in my belly, at first light as if someone were drawing a thin line beneath my skin, then growing sharper, deeper, and more insistent with every passing hour. Nathaniel lay beside me, one hand bracing my back, the other wrapped around my fingers as though letting go for even a moment would allow everything to slip out of control. He said very little, only watched me with a mixture of worry and resolve, and I knew he was counting my breaths, counting the minutes, standing guard at the threshold between life and the quiet miracle waiting to arrive. When my water broke, Monica was already prepared. She brought us to the nearest hospital without a single question. Everything unfolded in a blur of pain and muffled machine sounds. I remember the ceiling lights, harsh and blinding, the clipped commands of the doctor, and Nathaniel's hand gripping mine, never loosening even as sweat poured down his face. I screamed when the pain crested, feeling as if my whole body was splintering into pieces, but through the chaos I still heard his whisper at my ear, each word trembling yet steady as a stone in a storm. "You're doing so well. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And then, in that suspended moment between agony and breathlessness, I heard our child cry. The first cry thin but piercing, as if tearing through all the darkness I had walked through for so many months. A nurse brought the baby close, a tiny warm being, red and trembling, her eyes fluttering open as though she were trying to understand the world for the first time. Nathaniel sat beside me, silent, touching her cheek with the lightest brush of his fingers before looking at me with eyes I had never seen on him before. It was not the gaze of a man who had once shaken the underworld, but of a father discovering fear, tenderness, and a love so profound it robbed him of speech. We named her Grace, a simple name, delicate as a breath, carrying everything we had lost, found, and fought to protect, with whatever parts of ourselves remained. The days that followed drifted by slowly, as if time itself paused to let us absorb every new moment. Nathaniel never left the hospital. He changed diapers, rocked her to sleep, learned to cradle her properly, sometimes awkwardly enough to make us laugh. But his eyes never drifted from Grace, not even for a heartbeat. I watched him, watched the child born from a love once shrouded in darkness, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because we no longer faced the past alone. We had each other, and we had a reason to move forward stronger, gentler, and for the first time, truly a family. Grace slept softly in Nathaniel's arms, and I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat like a lullaby of its own. I closed my eyes and whispered that if this was a dream, I hoped never to wake. In that moment, I knew that whatever lay ahead, we had already been given the most precious thing of our lives, a child, a beginning, a love reborn. 3 weeks after Grace entered the world, Nathaniel walked through the door with a stack of thick, bound documents. He placed them on the table, looking at me with a quiet intensity. I picked up the first file and saw the dates stamped on the header. They weren't from 2 weeks ago. The earliest dates went back more than 3 months to the very week he had found me at the clinic. I looked up at him, stunned. You started this back then?" Nathaniel nodded, sitting down across from me. "I didn't wait for your ultimatum, Emily. The morning after I saw you in Providence, I knew I couldn't be the man I was anymore. I started liquidating the illegal assets, severing ties, and moving the clean capital into blind trusts immediately. It takes months to dismantle an empire without getting killed, not weeks. He tapped the papers gently. Your 2-week deadline. That was just enough time for the final audits to clear and the last signatures to dry. He opened the folder to the final page. The transport network has been sold. The clubs are now under independent management with no ties to my name. And the rest? It's all in a trust fund for Grace, untouchable by anyone from my past. He looked me in the eye, his voice low but unwavering. It's done. Truly done. Those 2 words rang like a final bell. Not the end of a chapter, but the end of an entire life he had lived, fought in, drowned in, and once believed he could never escape. I did not ask what it took to reach this point. I did not force him to recount the tense meetings, the quiet negotiations, the final handshakes with people he had once trusted and now needed to walk away from. I only held his hand and looked into his eyes and saw a man who had pulled himself out of the shadows with his own strength. No more blood, no more orders, only responsibility and love. Grace stirred in her crib, her small lips puckering as if dreaming something sweet, and Nathaniel rose, walked to her, and kissed her forehead. He told her that from this day forward, everything was different, that she would grow up in a home without secrets, without midnight calls, without men hiding guns in their coats or phone rings that made her mother's heart freeze. From today on, she would know him only as an ordinary man who worked, came home, held her close, and loved her mother with all he had. I turned away, eyes stinging, because sometimes happiness arrives not in grand gestures, but in papers stamped and signed, in 2 simple words that cost a lifetime to speak. It's done. And for the first time since stepping into Nathaniel's world, I believed it. There was no one left standing behind him, no reason left to run, only the 3 of us, and a future opening gently before us, full of hope. One late afternoon in early spring, in the small garden behind our house on the outskirts of Boston, sunlight filtered through the swaying branches and stretched across the soft grass like a warm blanket of peace. Nathaniel was holding Grace in his arms, lifting her up and lowering her gently, while she giggled every time she rose toward the light. I sat nearby with a warm cup of tea, my heart settling in a quiet calm, as if all the storms of our past had finally drifted far, far away. What once was darkness now lived only as memory, still capable of stinging in sleep sometimes, but never strong enough to pull us back toward the abyss. Family was something neither of us truly understood until Grace arrived. She was not only a tiny, beautiful life, but a symbol of forgiveness, hope, and rebirth. Looking at Nathaniel now, no one would recognize the man who once lived in a world of power and danger. He chose love over vengeance, creation over destruction, and fatherhood over the crown of an empire. Our story is not perfect. It holds pain, loss, difficult choices, and moments when moving forward felt impossible. Yet those very moments are what make the journey precious. They remind us that no matter who you once were or what you have done, there is always a second chance if your desire to change is sincere. And that love, when it is deep and honest, can lead us through even the darkest corners of the human heart. What about you? After hearing this story, what resonates with you the most? Have you ever stood at the threshold between forgiveness and anger? Do you believe a person can truly change for love and family? We would be honored to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Every heartfelt reflection you share is a gift to us, and who knows, you may become the inspiration for the next story we tell. If this story touched you, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share it to help spread more meaningful messages to the community. Each day, we bring you emotional, honest, and life-affirming videos told with all our heart. We will see you in the next video, where more untold stories are waiting to unfold. Wishing you good health, joyful days, a peaceful mind, and a steady heart. Goodbye, and see you again soon.